This is the Open University.
Hello, my students and wild creatures. This is an Open University in which I thought I'd talk about or show you my photographs like I did last time, but do something different this time, which is have some... I'm sorry, I've been interrupted by a GBA. GBA is a wild creature in French, and it's sort of a nickname of my girlfriend, Noemi, and she likes to interrupt. But so here I am doing the intro, trying to do the intro, really just thinking about radical disjunctures and how it's like a horse under me, how R. Murray Schafer talked about schizophonia, which is the playing of one sound in the environment of another where you'd expect a different sound. And I used to, when I was in Hokkaido in 2005, I sort of played around with this idea of schizophonia by playing ambient sounds recorded in one environment into another environment, and getting a kind of sense of a parallel world emerging when you sort of combine these things. So I thought, instead of just describing what's in the photographs you're seeing now, which is, it's just my life in Paris. It's cafes, it's secondhand clothes shops, it's parks and royal palaces, or, they were royal palaces before the revolution hit, or people going to vote in the recent elections, or things seen in shop windows and shops. And I thought, instead of doing that, I would just talk about other things which are off-screen, talk about the kind of random impressions that you get when imagine you're in a chair, you're relaxing in the sun, and you're just thinking about something totally unrelated, but you notice there's a little jet aircraft crossing the sky, and it's about to collide with a cloud, apparently, and then there's a bird at a lower level, which adds another shape to the picture. So you're kind of having a daydream. Essentially, you're dans les nuages, as we say, and we French people say. You're in the clouds. I spent half my life at school, for instance, gazing out of the window and being punished sometimes for gazing out of the window and imagining things, but for me it's one of the great pleasures of life, and the kind of things that happen in your brain when you're just gazing out of a window, kind of taking your surroundings for granted, but connecting in your imagination with something that's distant, that's not present. We could get all, the metaphysics of presence and difference and irreconcilability, undecidability, all these sort of buzzwords in philosophy, but it's more like, for me, it's more like a kind of drug experience a little bit, where you're thinking and your mind is drifting to something, and then suddenly you have a little glimpse of the kind of thing that you thought of as a child. You could imagine, you could see into a world where everything is a little bit different. I think the world is too defined. The world we know from the newspapers, for instance, God knows it's depressing just now with wars and plagues and things going on in the world, but it's or talking about Elon Musk and Amber Heard and Johnny Depp and all the over-familiar things we're encouraged to think about. I've never knowingly seen a film featuring Johnny Depp. I really don't know much about him. All I know is that when I was in Myanmar, people were shouting out "Jespero" on the street to me, and I thought this was some local folk figure that I resembled, but it turned out it was Jack Sparrow, who was played by Johnny Depp in the Pirates of the Caribbean film, which I'd never seen. I have seen a couple of films which were really impressive in the last month or so. One of them was the Japanese film by the director of Drive My Car, and I think in English it's called Our Apprenticeship, but in French it's called the Conte something, stories of something, in a way almost calculated to raise the spectre of Eric Romer, who of course titled many of his films Tale of This, Tale of That, Conte d'Hiver, Conte de... something Ali Smith has actually adopted as well in her novels recently. The spring, summer, winter, autumn season tales. I really loved that film, and I also loved My Neighbor Totoro, which I saw for the first time in this period, this time period. And I think maybe of the two, because one of them's kind of an adult film and the other is very much a children's film, but it's for the child in all of in us adults as well. These are, by the way, the pictures on the screen. It's Art Paris, which we also saw in this period, and as last year, it was slightly disappointing. I found it sort of conservative, but there were a few interesting things there to photograph. We will be going later to the Venice Biennale next month, and that's always, again, really what I'm talking about. It's like if you don't read the curatorial text, and this one's called The Milk of Dreams, this Venice Biennale, the curator has titled it with this poetic title, which kind of pleases me because I didn't want anything too didactic and too heavily political, although I think a lot of it is identity politics in the sense of pushing forward women and black artists and, the global south and all the rest of it. But as long as that is not rubbed under my nose too strong. I mean, I'm absolutely in favour of women artists being very prominent, but I don't want there to be globs of curatorial text telling me that I've got to think about this in those framings, because that's very limiting. And what I want is to pass from room to room and get my imagination lit up in the way, when you watch a Fellini film or something, you watch a film which is kind of from the 1960s and has that feeling of the 1960s, the sort of libertarian, so-called permissive quality that the 60s had, but also is from, say, the Roman Empire. It's set in the time of the Roman Empire, and it's some slaves escaping and, having a semi-gay relationship with each other and encountering all sorts of weird hermaphroditic forms and people having, wrestling with lions in arenas and whatever. It's sort of the collision of various worlds to create another world, a kind of a fourth world. The 1 plus the 3 equals the 4 kind of thing in John Hassell's terms, or Brian Eno's terms. It just it's something to inflame the imagination by putting disjuncting kind of things which are not consistent with each other and are not expected to be in the same lexical set or whatever. Anyway, this is kind of my experience of a day in Paris as well. So it is kind of relevant to these pictures because you never quite know what kind of day you're going to have. We kind of jokingly set out in the morning saying we're going to drink un café de qualité, high quality coffee. And it's really, that's just the pretext to go out. And one of our recent discoveries actually is this new bubble tea place, which is no longer a bubble tea place. They call themselves sommelier, in the model of wine sommelier of drinks which are their own invention, really. I always have one called umai, which is it's got liquid cheesecake in it and sort of plum flavor and a kind of yeasty aftertaste and lots of different layers. And does it have bubbles, tapioca bubbles? I think no, it doesn't. It has little pellets of another kind of clear gel. So that in itself is a poem, to get that to take away and sit in a park or go down to the Tuileries Gardens and feel yourself to be some kind of latter-day emperor is a real sort of experience. And it is it's like drinking poetry. It's a poetry in a glass. They can use that slogan if they want. And the same with secondhand clothes, really. You don't really expect that kind of sequence of clothing. And you don't expect it. It doesn't fit. It's not fast fashion, which fits in with this month or this week or even this year, because it's all vintage clothing, thrifted clothing is all from a different period. And for that reason, it's a kind of poetry because it either reminds you, if you're old enough to remember the period it's from, reminds you of your youth, or it summons up a world which you've never known, but you know that other people have known it. And that sort of, that distance, the fact that it's not your memories, but kind of borrowed memories from someone else, misremembered, and maybe wrong, certainly wrong, is really interesting to me. That it's much more evocative than, industrial manufactured clothes, which are targeted at consumers in the present. This was something I was going to talk about. If I had an ideas talk this time, rather than just an experiential, here's what I've been doing kind of talk, I was going to talk about this thing, which I call the oh gosh, not the choir invisible. I call it the ineffable cohort, which is a kind of a lumpy phrase. But the ineffable cohort, to me, is something to do with... well, it relates to that thing on my last album, the Smudger album, where I found some videos of Dudley Moore, the comedian, British comedian, doing some Brecht and Benjamin Britten songs in spoofs, musical spoofs, because he'd been a precocious musical student and was able to parody Brecht and all sorts of people very accurately. And Benjamin Britten apparently hated it and hated the accuracy of it and the fact that he'd been rumbled and sussed and copied. And so one of the things that struck me about that was that the audience at Beyond the Fringe, where Dudley Moore performed those skits, really picked up on the references. And I think that's something that you wouldn't expect an audience at a comedy show today necessarily to do, because those are high cultural references. Brecht's songs, Benjamin Britten's operas, those are pretty, do people go to comedy shows who go to, Benjamin Britten operas? I'm not sure if there is an overlap. The Venn diagram has separated, and there's just now a handful of people who would understand that enough to laugh at it when it's being parodied. So this is kind of interesting to me that somehow there was, in the mid-20th century, there was an ineffable cohort of people that were a kind of imagined audience, or on the part of broadcasters and people putting on shows and things like that. First of all, they were imagining an audience that maybe was a little bit more refined and sophisticated than the audience really was, but the audience didn't mind that and was prepared to laugh, as if they were that audience. They could step into that role, and the illusion could be perpetuated that everybody fitted with everybody else's ideas of who they were, even when they weren't. And the other angle on it is that the audience themselves, people, culture consumers themselves, were being sort of lectured to. Mansplaining was going on. You had radio programs called things like The Brains Trust. You had a Arethian kind of attitude of let's teach people the quality high culture so that everybody can have access to high culture. The third program, whatever. It was very high-minded. And I don't think they really measured ratings. It was a public service broadcast ethic, so they didn't look at how many people were actually tuning in. Later, of course, there was much more information coming to broadcasters about who was watching. And so things which used to be on mainstream broadcast channels like BBC Two, arts programs, they went later and later at night, first of all. And then they were shunted off to BBC Two when that started. And then they were shunted to digital programs, channels, when those started in the 90s. And then they were even replaced on the digital channels by reruns of Top of the Pops and things like that, and populist stuff that would have been on really mainstream channels in the old days. But the broadcasters saw exactly how few people were watching those. As soon as digital came in, they could see exactly how few people were watching. So I think the internet has actually shown us all exactly what ratings you get. You can put a video on YouTube and you see how few people are watching. And you either change to get more people to watch your stuff, or you just say, well, listen, I'm going to be a bit Arethian about this and say it's not a fault, it's not a problem that very few people are watching. It's that we just don't have this kind of ineffable cohort anymore. We don't have a highbrow culture anymore which people aspire to or are supposed to aspire to. We kind of give people what they want, and we know exactly what they want because we're monitoring the demographic at every given moment, and advertisers are monitoring it even more intensely than content creators are. So I kind of feel a nostalgia for the ineffable cohort of my youth. I kind of feel that we could be aspiring, we could be, and it doesn't have to be factual or even cultural stuff. It can be that you find the part of yourself which responds to a Miyazaki film. There is something high-minded about Miyazaki, I find. He's got a morality built into his worldview, which is very carefully non-Manichaean. He's not dividing people into evil and good. He's not lecturing anybody. There's a certain sense of ambivalence, which he deliberately engineers into his films. The characters can be, ambivalent. So, I think it does relate to this idea of the sort of disjuncture which sparks the imagination. And it doesn't have to be schizophrenia. That kind of sounds like it's almost a disease when you use that term, schizophrenia, when there's two unrelated sounds playing over each other and they create a third sound. That's what you're doing when you're composing music, of course, as well. You're totally making up new sounds. But I think also your day is a kind of self-portrait for a start, because especially the things you choose to photograph during a day are very much, it's your eye, it's your camera, it's your reflex. It's very reflexive, because you're walking down the street and you think, and it's funny because Noemi now sees the kind of things that I would photograph and points them out to me and says, look, one of your photographs is sitting there on the street. And it's like she knows before I take the picture what pictures I'm going to take. And so that's really, that's kind of what I wanted to talk about. How you thread experiences through the day when you don't have necessarily appointments. I'm not retired, but I like to take life quite easy when I'm not working. I work very intensely when I work, but when I'm not working, I try not to think about anything productive or anything constructive. What I really am searching out is pungent experiences which can be threaded in a kind of random and unexpected way with other pungent experiences. So I hope I'm not falling into habit patterns. I mean, one way to avoid that is to travel. So going to Italy, we're actually heading off to Scotland quite soon as well. So I'll be in Scotland for the first time in over 2 years. And I don't really have habit patterns in Scotland. It's weird, because when I was in Scotland, I was mostly just being a student, or I was at school. So at school, very, very much your day is imposed on you. Exactly what you'll be doing is pretty predictable. My school had a weird kind of system where they had like a 7-day, I think it was a 7-day calendar which was imposed on the week, which was only a 5-day week. And so you would always, it would say day 6, and day 6 would fall 1 week on a Tuesday, and the next week it would be a Thursday or Friday or whatever. So it was a way to break up the habit pattern. You didn't know what you would be doing on any given Wednesday at 3 o'clock. It would be its own kind of snaking calendar. So you get kind of unexpected things, like you'd always have you'd be marching about on the playground pretending to be soldiers on Monday afternoon, but that wouldn't always be a day 6. Anyway, that's kind of what I wanted to talk about today. It looks like it's the end of the video, so that was probably completely incoherent glob of ideas, but that's all I've got to say. So I'll be back, God knows when. Maybe with a report from Scotland, maybe from the Venice Biennale.
Open University.
TV Club. Our next program this morning begins in 2 minutes.